The colony of New Haven sat on the edge of an alien world, surrounded by thick purple forests and silver mountains. It was a quiet place, a home for humans who had left Earth long ago, searching for a better life. Most people in the colony had lived there for years, raising families, building homes, and working in the fields. But in the center of the colony stood something strange, something no one could explain. A statue. It had been there for 30 years. No one knew where it came from. No records mentioned who built it. The old settlers told stories about it, saying it had always been there, even before humans arrived. The statue was tall and smooth, made of dark blue stone that never cracked, never gathered dust, never aged. Some people thought it was just a piece of alien art. Others believed it was something more, something alive. David's curiosity. David Reed had always been curious about the statue. He was a young engineer, always fixing machines and studying old technology. But the statue fascinated him. Unlike the others, he never ignored it. Every time he passed by, he felt like it was watching him. One evening, after finishing his work, David found himself standing in front of it again. The sky was turning dark, painted in shades of red and violet, and a cold wind blew through the colony. David reached out, brushing his fingers along the smooth surface. It was colder than ice, sending a shiver down his spine. "How can it be this cold in this weather?" he muttered to himself. As he pulled his hand away, something odd caught his eye, a faint glow deep inside the stone. It was barely visible, like a tiny spark hidden beneath the surface. David frowned. Was it just a trick of the light? Before he could think further, a loud boom echoed across the sky. The storm and the impossible sight. A storm was coming. Thick clouds rolled in fast, and the wind howled through the colony. People ran inside, closing doors and windows. But David didn't move. His eyes were still fixed on the statue. A bright lightning bolt struck the ground nearby, shaking the earth. For a split second, the entire colony lit up. And that's when David saw it. The statue's eyes glowed. Not a reflection, not a trick of the storm. They truly glowed. A deep, unnatural violet light shone from within the stone. David's breath caught in his throat. What the hell? He took a step back, his heart pounding. Had anyone else seen it? He looked around, but the colony was empty. Everyone had taken shelter from the storm. He was the only one outside. Another lightning bolt struck, this time even closer. The ground trembled beneath his feet. The wind howled louder, as if the planet itself was whispering a warning. And then, just as suddenly as it came, the storm passed. Something has changed. David stood frozen, staring at the statue. The glow was gone. It looked the same as before, silent, unmoving, cold. But something felt different. The air around it was heavy, charged with energy. His skin tingled as if tiny electric currents ran through his body. He swallowed hard. Had he imagined it? Or had the storm awakened something inside the statue? A strange fear crept into his mind. He had lived in this colony all his life, and the statue had always been just a statue. But now he wasn't sure. David took one last look at the silent figure before stepping back. He needed to think. He needed to talk to someone. But deep down, he knew something was about to change, and the mystery of the forgotten statue was just beginning. David couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the statue's glowing violet eyes staring back at him. The image was burned into his mind, and no matter how much he tried to convince himself that it was just a trick of the storm, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had truly changed. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of the colony's generators. Outside, the wind had calmed, and the world had returned to its usual quiet state. But David's heart refused to settle. After what felt like hours, he sighed, threw off his blanket, and got up. If he couldn't sleep, he might as well go back to the statue and see it for himself. Maybe in the cold light of morning, everything would make sense. David grabbed his jacket and stepped outside. The colony was still asleep, the streets empty, lit only by the soft glow of the streetlights. He made his way to the town square, his footsteps the only sound in the stillness of the night. As he approached the statue, a strange uneasiness settled in his chest. The air felt heavier, thicker somehow. He took a deep breath and stepped closer. Nothing had changed. The statue stood exactly as it had for the past 30 years, tall, unmoving, silent. No cracks, no signs of wear, just the same smooth, unbreakable surface. David exhaled, shaking his head. Maybe he really had imagined it. Maybe the storm had messed with his head. But then he noticed something new. A faint imprint on the stone's surface, right where he had touched it before. His heart skipped a beat. He reached out again, pressing his palm against the same spot. The moment his skin made contact, a jolt of energy ran through him. David yanked his hand away, stumbling back. His fingers tingled, and for a brief second, he could have sworn he felt something pulse beneath the stone, like a heartbeat. He stared at the statue, his breathing uneven. This was real. Before he could react further, a deep cracking sound filled the air. David's eyes widened as thin fractures spread across the statue's surface, glowing faintly with an eerie purple light. The cracks spread like veins, growing wider with every passing second. He took another step back, his mind racing. What was happening? The ground trembled slightly beneath him. A faint, rhythmic thumping sound filled the air, like something alive was trying to break free. Then, all at once, the statue shattered. A cloud of dust exploded outward, and David raised his arm to shield his face. He coughed, his eyes stinging, his ears ringing from the sudden impact. When the dust finally settled, he lowered his arm, and what he saw made his breath catch in his throat. A girl. She lay on the ground where the statue had stood, her body curled in on itself, her breathing shallow. She was unlike anything he had ever seen. Her skin was smooth, almost metallic, shimmering faintly under the dim light. Her hair, long and silver, flowed around her like liquid metal. She wore a form-fitting suit of unknown material, glowing faintly with the same violet hue he had seen inside the statue. David stared, unable to move. The girl was the statue. And now, she was alive. Her fingers twitched. A small, shuddering breath escaped her lips. Then, slowly, she opened her eyes. David felt his stomach tighten. Those same violet eyes from before, but now, they were filled with confusion, fear, and something else. Something even more unsettling. Recognition. She looked at him as if she knew him. "Human," she whispered, her voice weak but clear. David's mind raced. Who was she? How had she been trapped inside the stone? And why did she look at him as if he was the answer to something far bigger than he could understand? Before he could speak, her body suddenly tensed. Her eyes darted around wildly, panic rising in them. "They know," she gasped. "They know I'm free." David's blood ran cold. "Who?" he asked. "Who knows?" She turned her head toward the dark horizon, her breathing quick and unsteady. "The ones who did this to me," she whispered. "The ones who will come back." A distant roaring sound filled the air. David turned toward the horizon, his heart pounding. Far in the distance, beyond the safety of the colony, something was moving. And whatever it was coming fast. David's heart pounded as he turned his head toward the horizon. The night was dark, the stars barely visible behind thick clouds, but in the distance, something moved. A faint glow, a shifting shadow, something unnatural creeping closer. The girl beside him tried to stand but collapsed onto her knees, her body weak and trembling. She took ragged breaths, her fingers gripping the ground as if trying to feel the reality of the world around her. David took a cautious step forward. "Hey, are you okay?" His voice was barely a whisper. She turned her head toward him, her violet eyes flickering with recognition. "You freed me," David swallowed hard. Yeah, I guess I did. But what do you mean by? Before he could finish, she suddenly flinched, her entire body tensing. She turned toward the horizon, her eyes going wide with fear. They're here. David followed her gaze. The glow in the distance had grown stronger. The shadows moved faster now. And then he heard it. A low, rumbling hum, like the sound of something massive cutting through the wind. What's coming? David asked, his voice sharp with urgency. Who are they? She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to stand. She was taller than he expected, easily 6 feet, but she looked fragile, like she hadn't moved in decades. Despite that, there was something fierce in her stance. They are the ones who imprisoned me, she said, her voice tense. And now they know I am free. David's stomach twisted. His mind raced through every possibility. Was she talking about an alien species, some kind of ancient enemy? And more importantly, was the colony in danger? He didn't have time to ask, because at that moment, the first ship appeared over the ridge. A sleek black shape hovered over the landscape, its surface almost invisible against the night sky. Then another appeared, and another. 3 ships, silent, predatory. David's instincts screamed at him to run. But the girl beside him didn't move. Instead, she raised a shaking hand and placed it against her forehead, closing her eyes for a brief moment. The violet light that once glowed beneath her stone prison flickered to life, tracing lines along her skin. When she opened her eyes again, there was fire in them. David took an uneasy step back. What are you? She didn't answer. Instead, she took a slow, deep breath. And then she ran. Faster than David thought possible, she moved toward the ships, her silver hair flowing behind her like liquid metal. David hesitated for half a second before his instincts kicked in, and he ran after her. The ships hovered lower, scanning the area with strange beams of red light. As they passed over the ground, the air seemed to shimmer, warping as if reality itself was bending. Then, the creatures appeared. Tall, thin figures emerged from the ships, their bodies covered in sleek black armor. Their faces were hidden behind dark helmets, and in their hands they carried long, jagged weapons that pulsed with energy. David had never seen anything like them before. They moved in eerie synchronization, stepping forward in absolute silence. The girl stopped a few feet ahead of him. Her breathing was uneven, but she stood tall, her fists clenched at her sides. One of the creatures stepped forward. It was taller than the others, its armor marked with strange glowing symbols. When it spoke, its voice was cold, emotionless. Designation: Celia. David's breath caught in his throat. They knew her. The girl, Celia, narrowed her eyes. You should have killed me when you had the chance. The leader tilted its head slightly. Then it raised its weapon. Containment protocol reinitiated. The air around them cracked with energy as the creatures surged forward. David had no time to think, no time to process. The battle had begun. David's heart pounded as he turned his head toward the horizon. The night was dark, the stars barely visible behind thick clouds, but in the distance, something moved. A faint glow, a shifting shadow, something unnatural creeping closer. The girl beside him tried to stand but collapsed onto her knees, her body weak and trembling. She took ragged breaths, her fingers gripping the ground as if trying to feel the reality of the world around her. David took a cautious step forward. Hey, are you okay? His voice was barely a whisper. She turned her head toward him, her violet eyes flickering with recognition. You freed me. David swallowed hard. Yeah, I guess I did. But what do you mean by? Before he could finish, she suddenly flinched, her entire body tensing. She turned toward the horizon, her eyes going wide with fear. They're here. David followed her gaze. The glow in the distance had grown stronger. The shadows moved faster now. And then he heard it. A low, rumbling hum, like the sound of something massive cutting through the wind. "What's coming?" David asked, his voice sharp with urgency. "Who are they?" She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to stand. She was taller than he expected, easily 6 feet, but she looked fragile, like she hadn't moved in decades. Despite that, there was something fierce in her stance. "They are the ones who imprisoned me," she said, her voice tense. "And now they know I am free." David's stomach twisted. His mind raced through every possibility. Was she talking about an alien species, some kind of ancient enemy? And more importantly, was the colony in danger? He didn't have time to ask, because at that moment, the first ship appeared over the ridge. A sleek, black shape hovered over the landscape, its surface almost invisible against the night sky. Then another appeared, and another. 3 ships, silent, predatory. David's instincts screamed at him to run, but the girl beside him didn't move. Instead, she raised a shaking hand and placed it against her forehead, closing her eyes for a brief moment. The violet light that once glowed beneath her stone prison flickered to life, tracing lines along her skin. When she opened her eyes again, there was fire in them. David took an uneasy step back. "What are you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she took a slow, deep breath. And then she ran. Faster than David thought possible. She moved toward the ships, her silver hair flowing behind her like liquid metal. David hesitated for half a second before his instincts kicked in, and he ran after her. The ships hovered lower, scanning the area with strange beams of red light. As they passed over the ground, the air seemed to shimmer, warping as if reality itself was bending. Then, the creatures appeared. Tall, thin figures emerged from the ships, their bodies covered in sleek black armor. Their faces were hidden behind dark helmets, and in their hands, they carried long, jagged weapons that pulsed with energy. David had never seen anything like them before. They moved in eerie synchronization, stepping forward in absolute silence. The girl stopped a few feet ahead of him. Her breathing was uneven, but she stood tall, her fists clenched at her sides. One of the creatures stepped forward. It was taller than the others, its armor marked with strange glowing symbols. When it spoke, its voice was cold, emotionless. Designation: Celia. David's breath caught in his throat. They knew her. The girl, Celia, narrowed her eyes. "You should have killed me when you had the chance." The leader tilted its head slightly. Then it raised its weapon. Containment protocol reinitiated. The air around them cracked with energy as the creatures surged forward. David had no time to think, no time to process. The battle had begun. He turned to Celia, his heart still racing. "What is this place?" She exhaled slowly. "A sanctuary." David's chest tightened. Sanctuary from what? Celia looked him in the eye. "From the war that's about to begin." David's pulse was still hammering in his ears as he tried to take in his surroundings. The hidden chamber was unlike anything he had ever seen. Smooth metallic walls covered in glowing violet patterns, strange floating orbs pulsing softly in midair. The place felt ancient and alive, as if the very walls were breathing. Celia placed her hand on one of the glowing panels. The entire room responded, shifting with a soft hum as new symbols flickered to life. David swallowed hard. "Where the hell are we?" Celia didn't look at him. An old resistance bunker, one of the last. Resistance. That word sent a chill down David's spine. He took a deep breath, trying to piece everything together. Alien soldiers. A girl trapped in stone. A war that had happened long before his time. And now he was standing in the middle of it. Celia's fingers danced over the glowing symbols. The air shimmered, and suddenly, a projection appeared. A massive holographic display stretching across the wall. David's breath caught. The projection showed a planet, but it wasn't Earth. It was a world covered in towering silver structures, endless rivers of glowing energy flowing between them. At first, it looked beautiful, but then David saw the destruction. Half the planet was in ruins. Blackened craters, shattered cities, entire sections of the world simply missing, like something had erased them from existence. What happened here? David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Celia finally turned to him. This was my home. David's stomach twisted. Was. Her expression darkened. The Dominion erased it. The Dominion. David didn't know who they were, but something about that name felt heavy, like it carried the weight of countless battles and untold destruction. Celia continued, her voice distant. My people were one of the strongest civilizations in the galaxy. We thrived for centuries. We built wonders that could rewrite the very fabric of reality. She gestured to the floating technology around them. We harnessed energy beyond what most species could comprehend. David frowned. Then how did you lose? Celia's jaw tightened, because we underestimated them. The projection shifted, zooming in on a massive fleet of black, angular ships cutting through space. Their sheer size was terrifying. They came without warning. Celia said, her voice laced with bitterness. They didn't conquer. They erased. Entire planets wiped clean. They weren't just fighting us. They were hunting us. David felt a cold pit in his stomach. And you fought against them. I was a commander, she said. One of the last. David studied her carefully. It was hard to imagine. This girl, who had been a statue just hours ago, was once a leader in an intergalactic war. How did you end up here? He asked. Celia's eyes flickered with something darker. Pain. Regret. I made a mistake. David waited, but she didn't elaborate. Instead, she turned back to the projection, watching as the Dominion fleet moved across the ruined landscape. They couldn't kill me, she continued, her voice quieter now. So they sealed me away, locked me in stone, buried me on a world that would never know who I was. She clenched her fists. They thought they had erased me. David exhaled slowly. But I woke you up. She nodded. And now, they know. Silence settled between them. David's mind was racing. This wasn't just about some alien war from the past. This was happening now. The Dominion was here. They had sent soldiers after Celia, and he had no idea what to do. Are they coming for you or for the colony? He asked. Celia hesitated. Both. David's stomach dropped. The colony was defenseless. They had no idea what was happening outside their walls. If the Dominion decided to wipe them out, there wouldn't be anything left by sunrise. We have to warn them, he said quickly. Celia shook her head. It won't matter. The Dominion doesn't negotiate. If they know I'm here, they'll purge everything. David felt a surge of anger. So what? We just give up. Let them destroy everything. Celia turned to face him fully, and for the first time, David saw something dangerous in her expression. No, she said. We fight. David almost laughed. Fight? With what? I don't know if you've noticed, but Earth doesn't exactly have space battleships lying around. We have farmers, engineers, people who've never even held a weapon. Celia studied him for a long moment. Then she turned back to the console and pressed her hand against it. The room shook. David stumbled back as the walls split apart, revealing something hidden beneath the chamber. His breath caught. It was a ship, not like the Dominions. This one was sleeker, alive, its surface shifting like liquid metal, its engines pulsing faintly with violet energy. David stared. What is that? Celia's lips curved into a small, dangerous smile. Our weapon. David's pulse raced. This was real. They weren't just running anymore. They were going to war. David's heart pounded as he stepped toward the ship. Its surface gleamed in the dim light, shifting like liquid metal, adapting to its surroundings. It wasn't just built. It was grown, its structure almost organic, yet undeniably powerful. He had never seen anything like it. Celia placed her hand against the hull. The ship responded instantly, glowing faintly beneath her touch, as if recognizing an old friend. A low hum vibrated through the chamber, and then, with a hiss of decompression, the ship's ramp extended downward, inviting them inside. David hesitated. This thing still works. Celia shot him a look. Do you think I'd rely on it if it didn't? He exhaled sharply. Fair point. She stepped inside first. David followed, his boots clanking against the smooth metal floor. The interior was unlike any human ship, sleek, seamless, with no visible controls. The walls pulsed with dim violet light, and symbols flickered across the surface as if the ship was reading them. It felt alive. David ran his fingers along one of the glowing lines. So, but how do you fly this thing? Celia moved to the center of the room, where a single floating sphere hovered in midair. The same way I used to, she said, pressing her fingers against it. The sphere flared to life, and suddenly, the ship moved. David barely had time to brace himself as the entire vessel lifted off the ground, rising smoothly through an opening in the ceiling that hadn't been there moments ago. He staggered, grabbing onto a support beam. Warn me next time, he shouted. Celia ignored him. Her violet eyes glowed faintly as she focused on the ship's systems. We don't have time for warnings, she muttered. The Dominion will realize we've escaped. We have to move now. David forced himself to steady his breathing. The walls around them shifted, turning transparent, revealing the colony far below. And that's when he saw it. The Dominion had already arrived. His stomach twisted into a knot. 3 massive black ships hovered over the colony, their dark hulls gleaming under the pale light of the moons. Beams of red energy scanned the settlement below, searching for them. David's grip tightened on the support beam. They're looking for you. Celia's jaw tensed. They'll find more than they bargained for. Before David could ask what she meant, a voice, cold, mechanical, echoed through the ship. Target acquired. David's blood ran cold. He turned just in time to see a massive blast of red energy erupt from one of the Dominion ships, heading straight for them. Celia reacted instantly. She slammed her hand against the control sphere, and the ship dove. The energy beam grazed their hull, sending a jolt through the entire vessel. David felt his stomach lurch as they spiraled downward, cutting through the sky like a comet. The Dominion ships were already in pursuit. David gritted his teeth. Do we have weapons on this thing? Shields? Anything? Celia didn't answer right away. She was focused, her hands glowing as she synchronized with the ship. The walls around them shifted, displaying tactical readouts in a language David didn't understand. Then, finally, yes. David barely had time to process before the ship fired. Twin violet energy blasts erupted from their vessel, streaking through the darkness like lightning. One of the Dominion ships swerved, barely dodging the attack. The second ship wasn't as lucky. The blast ripped through its hull, sending it spiraling downward. David clenched his fists. One down. But the battle was far from over. The remaining Dominion ships unleashed a barrage of red plasma fire, forcing Celia to maneuver through impossible twists and turns. The ship moved like a living thing, dodging attacks at the last possible second. David's knuckles turned white as he held on for dear life. Celia's expression remained calm, focused, deadly. These pilots are trained for war, she said, but they aren't trained to fight me. She suddenly stopped dodging. Instead, she turned the ship directly toward one of the Dominion vessels. David's eyes widened. Wait, what are you? Celia slammed her hand against the controls. The ship vanished. No explosion, no impact, just gone. David's brain struggled to process what had just happened until he felt it. A hum, a ripple, a shift in reality itself. Then they reappeared. Behind the Dominion ship, Celia smirked. They still haven't figured out how to phase jump in atmosphere. David blinked. Phase what now? Celia didn't answer. She simply raised her hand. and fired. The Dominion ship didn't stand a chance. The violet energy tore through its core, and with a final eerie wail, it detonated in a flash of fire and light. David let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Holy. But before he could finish, the final Dominion ship retreated. Celia narrowed her eyes. They're calling for reinforcements. David's chest tightened. And the colony? If they bring more ships. They won't stop, she said. Not until they have me. Or until everything is gone. A heavy silence settled between them. David clenched his jaw. Then we need a plan. Celia studied him for a moment. We do. Then she turned back to the controls. And for the first time, David saw something in her eyes. Not just determination. Revenge. The ship's interior pulsed with a faint violet glow, casting eerie shadows as Celia stared at the retreating Dominion vessel. It was fleeing now, but David knew that wouldn't last. They'll be back, he said, trying to keep his breathing steady. His pulse was still hammering from the fight. Celia didn't look at him. They're not just coming back, she murmured. They're bringing a fleet. David swallowed hard. A fleet. A full-scale invasion. His mind raced. The colony was defenseless. Farmers, engineers, scientists. People who had never held a weapon, let alone fought in a war. The Dominion wouldn't care. If they suspected even for a second that Celia was hiding among them, they would erase everything. He took a shaky breath. Then we have to evacuate. Celia finally turned to him. No. David frowned. What do you mean? No. She stepped forward, eyes glowing faintly. Running isn't an option. The Dominion doesn't leave loose ends. Even if we fled, they would track us. And the colony, if we leave them behind, they'll all die. David felt a chill settle in his bones. So what do we do? Celia's lips pressed into a thin line. Then she reached toward the glowing console and activated the ship's interface. A new projection appeared, a massive galactic map, displaying dozens of systems, each one marked with strange symbols. One symbol flashed brighter than the rest. David pointed at it. What's that? Celia's voice was steady. A weapon. David's breath caught. Celia turned to him, her expression grim. There's a place, not far from here. An old station, abandoned long ago. But my people, they built something there. Something powerful. David narrowed his eyes. Powerful how? Celia hesitated for just a second. It was our last defense against the Dominion. A failsafe. If it still works, it might be our only chance. David felt a flicker of hope before a sharp realization hit him. If it's so powerful, why didn't your people use it before? Celia's expression darkened. Because we never got the chance. A heavy silence followed. David exhaled slowly. So you don't even know if it still works? No, Celia admitted. But we have no other choice. David ran a hand through his hair. His mind was screaming at him that this was insane. But what other option did they have? The Dominion was coming. And the colony. If they didn't fight back, everyone would die. He took a deep breath. All right. Then let's go find this weapon. Celia nodded and turned back to the controls. With a soft hum, the ship shifted, its engines flaring to life. The walls around them became transparent, giving David a clear view as they shot through the sky, leaving the colony behind. He clenched his fists. Hold on, everyone. We'll be back. The journey took hours. David spent most of it watching the swirling violet nebulae pass by, his mind racing. Every so often, he would glance at Celia, who sat motionless at the helm, deep in concentration. The weight of what they were doing settled over him like a heavy fog. This was real. He had been a simple engineer just days ago. Now he was flying across the stars with an alien warrior, heading toward some ancient superweapon to fight an enemy he barely understood. It felt impossible. Yet here he was. The ship jolted suddenly, snapping him from his thoughts. "We're here," Celia said. David sat up, peering through the transparent walls. A massive structure drifted ahead of them. A dark, looming station floating in the void, half buried in the remnants of an asteroid field. It was ancient, its hull covered in the scars of past battles, and it was completely dead. No lights, no power, just an enormous husk, forgotten by time. David's stomach twisted. "You sure about this?" Celia didn't answer. She guided the ship toward the station's docking port, maneuvering through the shattered remains of other vessels, ships that had never escaped. That wasn't reassuring. With a soft hiss, their ship latched onto the station. The docking hatch whirred, unlocking itself. Celia stood. "Let's move." David hesitated. "And if something is still in there?" Celia gave him a sharp look. "Then we hope it's on our side." That wasn't reassuring either. The station was silent. David's footsteps echoed through the metal corridors as they moved carefully through the abandoned halls. The air was stale, cold, like no living thing had breathed it in centuries. Celia moved ahead, her posture rigid. She knew this place. David wasn't sure if that comforted him or terrified him more. They passed through what looked like an old control room, its screens shattered, wires dangling from the ceiling. Beyond it, a large corridor led to a reinforced door, covered in strange, unreadable symbols. Celia stopped. "This is it." David exhaled. "And behind that door?" She hesitated. "Either our salvation or our end." David didn't like that answer. Celia placed her palm against the symbols. The door shuddered, the markings flickering with weak energy. Then, the entire station rumbled. David staggered back. Was that? Before he could finish, the reinforced doors slid open. Inside was darkness, but something in that darkness was moving. David's breath caught. And then, two glowing violet eyes snapped open. A deep mechanical voice echoed through the chamber. Activating PROTOCOL0. The station lit up, flooding with energy. Power surged through the floors, illuminating ancient consoles, systems roaring back to life. Celia took a step forward, and in front of them, a massive machine began to rise from the shadows. A towering construct of sleek, silver armor, its limbs pulsing with the same violet energy that Celia possessed. It was a weapon. A sentient weapon. David's throat went dry. What is that?" Celia's eyes burned with determination. "Our last hope."